Lena had never intended to stay in the desert town of Las Sombras. She had been on her way to visit a distant relative in the next village when a fierce sandstorm had suddenly rolled in, turning the world around her into a blur of red and orange. The wind howled like a beast, and the air was thick with dust. The road became impassable, and her car stalled in the middle of nowhere, the engine sputtering out with a final reluctant cough. Alone, and with no phone signal, Lena had no choice but to seek shelter. She walked for miles through the blinding sand, the storm stinging her skin like tiny daggers, until she saw a shadow in the distance, a silhouette of a structure, half obscured by the swirling sand. It was an old, crumbling church, long abandoned by time, standing alone in the desert like a forgotten monument to something dark. Its Gothic spires jutted up into the sky like jagged teeth, and the stained glass windows were shattered, their colourful fragments scattered across the floor. Lena hesitated, but the storm was unrelenting. There was no other option. She pulled her scarf tighter around her face and entered the church, hoping for at least some respite from the storm. Inside, the air was thick and still, the silence oppressive. The church, once grand and imposing, now lay in ruin. Broken pews and shattered statues littered the floor, their forms twisted by time and decay. The altar was draped in tattered, moth-eaten cloths, and the air reeked of mildew and something else, something foul. Lena made her way to the back of the church and sat down, leaning against the cold stone wall. Her heart still raced from the storm, but she was grateful for the shelter, even if it was grim. As she sat, she noticed the shadows in the far corners of the church seemed to shift, moving as if alive. She tried to brush off the thought, attributing it to the storm playing tricks on her tired mind. But then she heard it, whispers, faint and indistinct, coming from the depths of the church. Lena froze, her breath catching in her throat. The whispers grew louder, like 1,000 voices speaking all at once, murmuring in a language she couldn't understand. Her pulse quickened, and she stood up, trying to find the source of the noise, but the church was empty. She was alone. The whispers continued, now almost a chant, and Lena's eyes were drawn to the altar. The shadows there seemed to gather and stretch toward her, as if something were reaching out from the dark recesses of the church. "Get out!" a voice hissed, so quiet she thought it was her imagination. But then the voice came again, this time louder, clearer. "You shouldn't have come." Lena turned, her legs trembling. She had to leave. But as she moved toward the door, it slammed shut with a deafening crash. The sound echoed through the church like a thunderclap. She ran to the door, tugging on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panicked, she backed away, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers grew louder, now accompanied by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate steps, echoing through the church. Lena turned, her eyes wide with terror, and there, in the center of the room, a figure appeared. It was tall, its form shrouded in black, indistinct shadows that seemed to swirl around it like smoke. Its face was obscured by a dark hood, but she could see its glowing eyes. Eyes that burned with an unnatural, malevolent light. "You shouldn't have come," it whispered again, its voice cold and hollow like 1,000 graves. The figure stepped forward, its feet not touching the floor, as if it floated just above the ground. Lena's heart pounded in her chest, and she stumbled backward, tripping over debris. The shadows in the church seemed to grow darker, closing in around her like a living, suffocating fog. As the figure drew closer, Lena could see something terrible, its hands, long and skeletal, reaching for her, each finger tipped with claws that scraped against the stone floor. The whispers grew more frantic now, their volume rising to a deafening crescendo, their words twisted and indecipherable. Then, suddenly, a violent flash of lightning illuminated the church, and for the briefest moment, Lena saw the truth. The church was filled with them. Dark, shadowy figures, hundreds of them, lined the walls and the pews, their hollow eyes watching her with malevolent intent. Their faces were twisted, their bodies half decayed, their mouths agape as they whispered, begged and cursed. The storm outside howled louder, and the temperature inside the church plummeted. Lena's breath turned to vapor in the freezing air. She tried to scream, but no sound came. She felt the cold grip of terror tighten around her throat as the shadowed figure loomed over her, its cold hand reaching for her chest. "You are the final one," it crooned, the last to witness what was never meant to be seen. The shadows began to close in, swirling around her like a maelstrom, and Lena realized in her final moments what had happened to the town of Las Sombras. The people who had once lived there had vanished, consumed by the curse that clung to the church like a festering wound. The whispers were their voices, their souls trapped in eternal torment, bound to the church for eternity. And now she had become part of the darkness, a lost soul to join their endless lament. Her body began to tremble violently, her skin growing cold as the figure leaned in close, its breath foul and rancid. "Welcome, Lena," it whispered, its voice thick with malice. "You will never leave." And in that moment, the church seemed to consume her, its walls pressing in on her, its shadows swallowing her whole. The storm outside raged on, but inside the church, the whispers fell silent, and Lena was no more. The next morning, the town of Las Sombras was still and quiet, as if nothing had happened. The church stood silently in the desert, a broken monument to the horrors it had witnessed. The storm had passed, but the curse lingered, waiting for the next lost soul who might wander too close. And inside, the whispers began again. Subscribe to Terror Tales, like and share our channel. Hit the bell for more creepy stories. Thank you for watching.